because we read through the entire gospel. So it's always fun to see, okay, what's Mark's take on the feeding of the 5,000 compared to Matthew and Luke and John? What's up with Mark? What I found this go around was it's helpful to have a big lead-in to the Gospel of Mark to unlock some of the meaning of how he bears witness to this epic story. I would even back out this story, which is found in Mark 6, to Mark chapter 3. A few weeks ago, we were in chapter 3. Do you remember the story where Jesus calls the disciples by name? And we had all those 12 names, and Kay was Judas, you might remember. We wanted to watch out for her. And Jesus called the disciples, and then he sent them out. So the disciples who are sent out are apostles. So they were sent out to serve. So that was chapter 3. Interestingly, in chapter 6, that part of the being sent story has a kind of part 2, where Jesus sends the apostles out, and there's more detail about the stuff they're allowed to take and not take. So that's another story we didn't discuss yet this year, but sometimes we've had fun with it, imagining, well, they're allowed to take a staff, but, no bag. And they're allowed to take one tunic, but not 2 tunics. So very limited in what their travel plans are like. But they're sent out, and they're sent out to teach and heal and, serve. So that is happening toward the beginning of Mark chapter 6. Then there's kind of a grisly story about the death of John the Baptist. And then Mark doesn't really comment on that. But when Mark picks up the story again, where we were today, Mark 6, verse 30, the disciples, the apostles, have returned from their big tour of service. And they're ready to talk to Jesus about all they have done and seen. And it's just this lovely, lovely, unique scene of them gathering with Jesus. And then in 6:31, Jesus says to them, you know what, guys? You've been through a lot. Let's come away. Let's go to a deserted place where there's nobody around, and let's take a break. And it says, because nobody had a chance to rest. There was no leisure because of everyone coming and going. They couldn't even take a break to eat. That's how busy they had been. So Jesus knew it was time for them to experience a little Sabbath. So they loaded up. Was it a cruise? Were they going to Disney? I don't know. It was a deserted place, so you might want to talk to Mike Charleston about Lake Crescent National Wildlife Refuge. Kind of like that scene is what I'm thinking. Nobody's around. You're in the sand hills, and there's just water and fish, and a bunch of them love to fish. So maybe that was where their headspace was. They'd just done this big tour of service, and now they're going to have a little getaway retreat with Jesus. So they rowed the boat. They went to the far side of the lake. And then what happened? Did you see what happened during Time for Discovery? Was it a deserted place? It was not. Somehow or other, those crowds had seen them depart, recognized who they were, and while Jesus and the disciples were rowing across the lake, these crazy crowds ran along by foot and beat them there to the other side. So that when they landed, they were already there and, teaming and greeting Jesus. Jesus, to his credit, we don't know what the disciples were thinking. When he disembarks, he sees the crowd and he feels compassion. Isn't that something? I think I might have felt irritation. He feels compassion, and there's no record of how the disciples felt about this. He feels compassion, because he sees that they are sheep without a shepherd. And so he begins teaching them many things. Then hours pass. And then we do hear from the disciples. The disciples seem to be tugging on Jesus' sleeve and saying, "Hello, the hour is late. And this is a deserted place except for these people here. And it would make sense if we sent them away into the nearby villages to get something to eat. It's time for them to go. Wrap it up." To which Jesus says, "You give them something to eat. You give them something to eat." And the disciples say, "Us. You want us to go on a shopping run?" For them. What kind of budget are we talking about here? And then Jesus transforms their idea about the situation. Here's Jesus' method. He says, "What do you have? Don't go online just yet. Don't start buying bulk just yet. What do you have?" And so they pause and they count up what they do have. And they had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And they take what they have and they give it to Jesus. Jesus takes it, looks heavenward, and does a blessing of these things, kind of like communion. And then he gives the bread and fish to the apostles, and they start distributing the food. And what happens? Was there enough? There was enough. I love how Mark summarizes it. All ate, and you know what? They didn't just eat a little snack. All ate. All were satisfied. All were full. All ate. All were full. And there were leftovers. 12 baskets of leftovers. And there were more than 5,000 people. It's a miracle. Welcome to the miracle of the loaves and the fish from the Gospel of Mark. Now, one advantage that we have when we read through the whole Gospel is that, like I said before, we have an interesting context when we hit famous stories. One thing that hit me was a pattern that I had noticed before at the tail end of Mark chapter 1. At the tail end of that chapter, maybe pick it up at verse 30 and forward, Jesus is very, very busy teaching and healing and exorcising demons. And he gets up early one day to take a break. He goes to a deserted place, a place without people, rises early, goes to a deserted place to pray. And then the very next verse, he gets interrupted by Simon Peter, tugging at his sleeve, saying, "Hey, Jesus, there's some people here that need help." And Jesus says, "Let's go. I'm on it." So Jesus has this pattern of taking a little break, and then the break gets interrupted, and then he's ready to serve again. So he's setting out a pattern then for the disciples. This is just the life of service. The one concerning thing there is it the life of being a workaholic? So I'm going to circle around and talk about that, I hope, more at the end here. But anyway, it was just interesting to notice that pattern of the servant life. Another thing you might wonder about with this text is you might be tempted to shame the disciples. Like, "Oh, they're so lame. Can't they see they're supposed to feed the people?" Don't go there. Look at the context. The disciples had just returned from serving the people. They were pretty skillful servants. they knew how to run the play by this time. They had been with Jesus for a chunk of time. They knew how to serve. They knew situational awareness. It's getting dark. There's quite a few people. They're going to want to eat. This is a form of intelligence. They were savvy about the situation. So it's Jesus who's acting crazy by saying, you feed them. And, they're savvy. They're like, well, again, you want us to feed them. Got it. Check. So we're going to go and buy. And again, what's the budget for that? Legitimate question. And then Jesus breaks the mold of thinking about a situation. Walking through it again, what do you have? What do you already have? It reminds me of one of our discovery practices at Session and Deacons, the ABCs. We affirm, build on, and celebrate. Doing a practice of affirmation says, what do you have? You focus on what you do have, a form of gratitude, rather than being, totally unaware or thinking, this or that, or being scattered. There's nothing like affirming, slowing down, and naming what you do have. And that becomes A, the affirmation becomes B, a building block for what might happen next. So the disciples counted up what they had, and then they turned and they trusted what they had to Jesus. So there is an accounting, and then there is a turning in trust, giving what they had to Jesus, and from that came the distribution. Taste and see that the Lord is good. So you all want to know, what really happened? What really happened? Was it magic? Was it a miracle? What really happened out there? This year in studying the text, I'm kind of persuaded of a particular thing. And it bounces us back to earlier in chapter 6. It's verse 6, 8. The part about where he's sending them out, and you're not supposed to take 2 tunics. You can only take 1 tunic. You can take a staff, but no bag. In that section it says, take no bread. When Jesus sends the disciples out to serve, they don't have food. They also don't have money. When the disciples go out to serve, they are not heroes. They are not self-sufficient. They are told to be dependent or interdependent. Dependent on God and dependent on the community and strangers. Jesus is fostering a sense of interdependence at the get-go. They had no bread. Another thing that strikes me in reading this story in context in the Gospel of Mark is another tiny detail. Back in 6:31, when Jesus says, "Come away, let's take a break. You guys have been working night and day." And then there's this lovely little phrase that said, "For they had been coming and going, and they did not even have leisure time to eat." The disciples didn't even have time to eat. Remember how this story ends? All ate. All were full. There were leftovers. 5,000 plus people were fed. Were the disciples fed in this story? You're darn tootin', they were fed. The disciples got fed in this story. This story is just so full of miracles. There's a miracle of Jesus having compassion for that teeming crowd when he knew there was exhaustion. There's a miracle of interdependence that we are dependent on each other for food to survive. And you wonder if that crowd saw the disciples giving up what they had, being dependent on God, and in the distribution, they knew about interdependence too. And suddenly they learned how to share. And there's another miracle in there. It's the miracle of not thinking about scarcity, but through this process of interdependence, there is abundance. There's leftovers. So many miracles. Maybe that's why this story got told 6 times in the Gospels. It's so truly amazing. It makes me think about things on a global scale. What if we practiced interdependence on a global scale? Would people have enough to eat? It got me thinking about discovery, about not just physical feeding, but spiritual feeding. It made me think about our Lent program of Cup of Life. People are not just physically hungry, they're spiritually hungry. And how are we a part of that system, that economic system of feeding people? Because through this feeding process, we are fed. You know, when I mentioned that Jesus, when he was interrupted in his study time at the end of chapter 1, he said these words when the people came to get him, "I'm ready to go, because this is what I came to do." Jesus knew what his existential purpose was. Existential is just a fancy word for life and death. Do you know what your existential purpose is? Do you know why you are on this earth? Do you know how you're going to get through this life here on earth? How will you be fed? I think that we are deeply fed by our purpose. It is an important thing. When we know our purpose, we are made whole. And knowing our purpose isn't just this individualistic thing that I'm going to go and I'm going to do this. Knowing our purpose is connected to other people and connected to God. There's this beautiful interdependency that makes us full and healed and joyful. And here's another cool thing to like about Mark's witness to this story. And I wouldn't have noticed it, but it's in the CEB translation. You might gloss over it in any other translation of this story. In the NRSV translation, which is in the Pew Bible, it says group, and you just keep going. In the CEB version, they don't use the word group. Jesus has the crowd sitting, quote, in banquet formation. He has the crowd sitting as though they were at a banquet on the green grass. It's like a party. It's beautiful. It's colorful. It's rooted in this Greek word symposia, which has the meaning of a convivial drinking party. Wow, a place where one might drink from the cup of life. This banquet is our existential purpose as Christians. This is where we're headed. This is what it's about. Everybody being fed. It happens at a global level. It happens at a church level. It happens with you. I hope and pray you have a sense, or you entrust yourself to God to reveal to you how you are on this earth and you are interdependent with God and other people, and you are part of God's recipe for all being fed and well. To God be the glory. Amen. in. Please be seated. All right, we come now to our time of prayers and minute for mission after that for one great hour of sharing. So, yay, it's a full day. It's a full day today. Glad to have you on board, and we have a very special birthday today. It is Joyce Serenel's birthday today. All right, Joyce. Joyce is very much part of our worship. She's always taking the worship notes. So happy birthday to Joyce. Hey, it's Phyllis Carter's birthday coming up today. Yay. Today, no, the 8th. The 8th is coming up. Let's see. Coming up also, the trifecta, Alma Lennon, Heather Mendoza, and Chris Carroll. 3 birthdays, one day. Wow. One day, you guys, bring it on. Susan Green, that's your aunt, isn't it? Her birthday's this week. Robin Weigert says happy birthday to grandson Mikey. Hey, Robin, he turns 3 on March 11th, so pretty cool. So we give thanks. Be thinking about other things you want to give thanks for. Here, I'll pause. Any other birthdays? Doing the quick birthday scan in case it didn't get in the pink slips.
Both of my stepdaughters-in-law, Glenda and Vicki.
All right, Glenda and Vicki. Happy birthday to them. All right, Julie's tomorrow. We give thanks. Great. We give thanks for a blood drive last week. Let's see. We give thanks for Lent. We hope that God uses our church during Lent to be part of feeding. Oh my gosh. Oof, we need some feeding. We are all on this ship of life together, and we all belong. So let's see. Hey, we give thanks for our Lent season. We have Cup of Life Fellowship Soup, 3 Sundays in a row. It's not too late to drive here if you're in driving range. Let's see. I think we have to start our regular seasonal special of Signs of Spring. Signs of Spring. Seen any signs of spring? Okay.
Robin.
Who's seen robins? Yeah. I've seen robins. All right, other signs of spring? Yeah? Daffodils are sprouting. Sprouting counts. That's where it starts. That's focus on what you have, not what's not there. Phyllis, what did you see? Phyllis Carter, you saw something. It was daffodils? I thought it was something else maybe, but anyway, yeah. Signs of spring, anybody else? Signs of spring? Sandals, that's crazy. That's a little rush in the season, as my mother would say, but that's okay. All are welcome. Bob Gantz? Lots of robins. Lots of robins. They are back. Some winters I think they never left, but this year I kind of didn't see them a while, and now I'm seeing them.
Busy.
Yeah, signs of spring. So just be ready, everybody. It's our weekly series, Signs of Spring. Another thing I thought, I just had so many little, I will call them sacred stories this